This week on our episode, our show, we're going to be discussing what are the keys, we'll say the 7 keys to a successful partnership. And I think this could be applied probably across any partnership, but we specifically love talking about dental partnerships. So let's break them down really quick. Here's the 7. So trust, any relationship, any partnership, you have to have trust. And we'll break that down. Communication and clarity, alignment in values, alignment in money,
Money.
complementary strengths, united vision, and a mentality of unselfishness, thinking we instead of me.
hmm
Those are the 7 keys, at least Dentist Partner Pro's 7 keys to a thriving partnership.
Yep.
Right? So let's start with number 1. Trust. It may seem obvious, but what does that actually look like, and how do you create it in a partnership, Bob?
Well, I think trust is fostered by the next value actually, which is communication and clarity. Okay. But more fundamentally than that, trust is the foundation of all human relationships, as my first mentor, Jim Faber, told me 40 years ago. And it really is. If you have trust, you've got magic. If you don't have trust, then things start to fall apart really quickly. Okay. And honestly, a lot of the work that we do to prevent dental divorces, interestingly, is to try to get trust back into the equation. Okay. Because too often, mistrust enters in by little wedges. I remember hearing a story years ago about this gentleman who was out chopping wood. He was using a wedge to try to split logs.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was done, he set the wedge in a tree and left. He never went and got the wedge back, you know. And years later, the tree had grown up, but this wedge was still right there inside that crotch. Big storm came, tree split apart. And guess what was right there in the center was a wedge.
Hmm.
And he just looked at himself and said, you know what? I should have taken care of that when the tree was small. Okay. I use that metaphor a lot for trust because so much mistrust happens by little things that then aren't communicated about. Okay. They're buried, or little things that seem to tip the scales. Our final point is unselfishness that we'll talk about in a little bit, but tip the scales in one person's direction or another. And again, it's not talked about. And that wedge is put there. Okay. And when those wedges appear in a partnership, they represent one word and one word only: resentment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think oftentimes in partnerships, especially dental partnerships, we see it all the time. They don't create spaces to actually have communication. It
Exactly.
starts to become very passive, and
hmm
it
And then
builds and it
aggressive.
builds and
Yep.
it builds, and it just becomes, like you said, resentment and
Yeah.
frustration. And
Yeah.
it starts to come through venting to your assistant, and it
hmm
starts to come through of having the office manager be the middleman. And
hmm And
it's
and then
these.
and then it starts to come through solving every problem through email,
Oh yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah, and there's no
Which we
actual
we
talk. And
yeah, there's no talk, and you're yelling at each other via email or texting.
yeah,
Okay.
all the
When
time. We see it all the time.
and the irony of it is that so often it's just that little tiny wedge that just really needs to be pulled out early, talked about, and then set aside. But one of the dynamics that we have, and especially with those who choose to go into dentistry, I'd say 80% of them are conflict averse. Okay. And
Agreed.
so
Yeah.
and so conflict itself seems to be this huge boogeyman that if I enter into it, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just going to ignore it. Where what we found is that instead, if you lean into it, and the phrase you use is enter the danger, okay, and it feels like that. Um, but it's like a conversation I had with one of my clients just a couple of weeks ago who likes his style is very conflict averse. And I said, Doctor, have you found that your team actually likes you more and respects you more when you're more direct with them and give them feedback? And he said, well, yeah. It's like, well, okay, so therefore, what do we do about it? Lean into
Yeah.
it. Don't sidestep it.
And it takes practice, and
It
and
does.
the more you
Mm-hmm.
can set yourself up for success by creating
Mm-hmm.
space and
Mm-hmm.
and practicing early on, especially, and
Yes.
continuing that habit, that frankly, the healthier and the stronger the bond becomes.
Yeah. Yeah,
When
for
when
sure.
you're really able to actually have that kind of communication and work through conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And something that really helps that is if you have clarity of expectations with one
Right.
another.
Right.
Oftentimes we do that through presiding doctor roles and understanding who does what, who
Well,
leads, who handles things like that, and being able
yeah.
to have discussions about
Mm-hmm.
roles, and having those expectations is really, really helpful.
Yes.
And I know you got something, so I'll wrap this up really quick. The other thing that we often see partnerships make a huge flaw is not putting things in writing.
Right.
I don't care if you're a father, son, brother, sister, husband, wife, friends, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If you have it in writing, it's easier to communicate about.
Well,
and it eliminates the fog of
right.
of lack of clarity.
And
So
hopefully, in getting into writing, it helped facilitate the expectation setting to
the
begin with.
conversation, the
Okay.
communication.
I mean, just like the call we had yesterday with this father-son combination, son's been working for 7 years, nothing's in writing. 2 years ago, he was supposed to buy in, so yeah, missed expectations, unset expectations, unmet expectations. Again, wedges, and they just compound on top of each other, and then suddenly there's no talk.
Yep.
And then you have the very real possibility of a dental divorce, just because of lack of trust. And one thing I want to say before we get into more communication and clarity and values, as you said, it's really helpful to have the space to be able to actually talk. Okay. And I'm thinking of one participant in my leadership class at Gordon Christensen's, who is a sister-in-law, brother-in-law combination, and they've never talked, and they're very different with each other. Okay. And I think you can think of the person. And at the end of the class, one of the things I told her was, listen, here's what we really need you to do is go to dinner. And she was like, what? I said, yeah, you gotta go to dinner. Okay. And then use something that marriage counselors actually taught me and my wife, which is called IFAB. Okay. Which stands for I feel, and then you describe your feeling about this situation because, and no one can argue with your feelings. Okay. And that's a very healthy way to start to engage in this type of discussion.
Be able to unload some of those
exactly,
things, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but do it in a non-threatening way, and you can't do it in anger. Okay.
Yeah.
And the cool thing was, she just texted yesterday and said things are actually better than they have been in years, just because they're starting to talk.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And one little trick of the trade I would say that we found really helps kind of bring everyone down to the same level is using something like a DISC personality assessment,
right. Yes.
or a Myers-Briggs or something. It pulls the onion back that is you as an individual, and sometimes we don't know or realize, maybe logically we get it, but emotionally we don't understand that not everyone communicates the same way that you do.
Right.
And so that's just a little trick. We've used it in every partnership, every team we go into, because it does exactly that. It's like people's light bulb moments are happening, and they're like, oh, that's why you communicate, or that's why you hate the directness or the conflict or whatever.
Or that's why we keep butting heads, because we're so much like each other, and suddenly the cool thing about Disc Brighten is it begins to objectify what they've been feeling underneath the surface, and then you can talk about it,
Yep.
but not in a emotional way,
Yep.
which is really, really cool to be able to do
Yeah.
that. And again, it reestablishes trust, because suddenly these dynamics that you haven't understood are like, well, we're not fighting against each other. We just haven't learned how to get along with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that happen.
For
See those
sure.
light bulbs won't go on.
So those
Obviously,
those are
I'm
the
sorry,
first
go
two
ahead.
keys, right?
Hmm.
We have
Yeah,
trust,
trust and
foundation,
communication,
communication,
and
and clarity. You have to have
hmm
those.
right.
Going into alignment of values.
Hmm.
And this is so ingrained into part of the trust and
Right.
communication. I mean, they all are, right?
Hmm.
And so the values, to me, it's almost the way that we view the world and how we make decisions.
Hmm.
And are those in alignment? If you have an individual that's super driven, you could say, I don't want to say money hungry, but wants to make a lot of money, and
Right.
they pride
Right.
themselves in that. And then you have another individual who is more impact
Laid
focused.
back. Yeah.
The money is more of a consequence, whatever you want to say.
Hmm.
I'm not saying
Hmm.
either one's right or wrong, but if you put those two in a partnership, it's over before it began, because they're going
Sure.
to view things differently. They're going to view decisions differently. They're going to they're always going to be misaligned. And
Hmm.
so that's why, I mean, just using you and I as an example, our values are hand in hand.
Yeah.
We
Very,
view the
very.
world in the same kind of way. We like to make decisions based upon those values,
Hmm.
and they make communication and conflict and all those things so much more
Well,
manageable.
yeah, and let me give you a counter example of that. And this was my first client as a practice management consultant, who's still a client, amazingly, 15 years later. But I remember climbing in. It was a 3-doctor practice at the time, and two of the doctors were very, very similar in temperament and style and values. And doctor number 3 was like, "Where did you come from?" You know, these two doctors were very family oriented. They were a little more quiet. They really liked to do their work well. They were athletic. Um, and this doctor number 3 had a really broken up family. He wasn't as much athletic as he was kind of an adrenaline junkie. Okay. Um, very verbose, very just, he had no filters whatsoever. And, he was in that practice for a few years, and it was just like, man, is this going to survive? Well, he solved his own problem because he eventually was asked to leave. Um, but it was just such an example of, if your values are in alignment, it just seems to unite your vision and your focus and your why. Okay. If they're not in alignment, your fundamental purpose of what you're doing is like on 2 different pages. And frankly, you can never get those pages back together. So that's why you
Yeah.
have to start off knowing that your values line up. Does that
Yeah.
mean they've got to be 100%? No, but
No.
I'd say about 80%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if I were giving any advice to someone that like is in a partnership right now, that's like, what does that even mean? Spend the time to actually define it for you personally.
Right.
Like, what are your key pillars in your life? For Bob and I, family, faith, uh, are essential, and they are the
Hmm.
core of everything that we do. And we know that about each other. So that
Right.
impacts the way we work in the business, that impacts the way that we help our clients, all of that. And so
Hmm.
starting to actually put words to paper and defining what are my main values in my life. And
Right.
they don't
Right.
have to be written in a fancy way, but actually
Hmm.
spending the mental energy to do that is it, you got to start with yourself. And that's what I would highly
Right.
encourage you to do, is start to define those for
Right.
yourself.
Yeah.
So going
Yeah.
on to the next one,
Money.
alignment in money. What it, no
Mhm.
one talks about this because one, I think it's taboo for people to address this, especially if you're considering bringing on a partner or even an associate you hope to become a partner or something like that. But it is so essential, just like a real marriage, how you're going to view money, how you're going to use it, how you spend it. All those things
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
are super important.
Right. Yep. How you view it, what your relationship is with it. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Do you approach it from fear and scarcity, or, more realistic? Do you view it as a tool? Whatever those answers are, you've got to be in alignment with one another.
Yeah,
Because if you're not, it goes back to this whole values gig, and then you're going to find you're on two different pages. Um,
yeah,
and then sadly, what happens from there is, uh, if your view of money is very, very different, how you spend money is very, very different, it just leads to mistrust. Okay,
it becomes a wedge.
it does. Yep, yep. So, the question that we ask, which with candidates, really, I think most
I
of
think
them
it's a
get blown
great
away, but
question.
I
Yeah.
do too. But they like never have been asked this, and it is, tell me about your parents' relationship with money.
What did you like
And
about it, and what did you not like about it?
exactly, yep. Because our relationship with money typically comes exactly from the way our parents viewed it. It's one of
Yeah.
those osmotic things we pick up.
Yeah, and
And
it was
then,
either like we couldn't stand the way that they did it, or
yeah, exactly.
we
And
really
therefore, I love
respected it.
spending it. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Or,
they were so cheap, and so I want to be able to spend money, or vice versa. They
mhm,
spent too much money, they got in debt, we were all
exactly.
over the place, and so now I'm like thrifty and I hold on to every single penny I can.
Right.
And
Right. Yep.
once that you start to look at that as an impact into a partnership of, do we invest into new equipment, do we
Mhm,
how much do we pay employees,
mhm.
uh, every little, what's going to be our fees, what risk do we take. It's all
Right.
comes down
It
to that
does.
money,
And
because
and if
it's
if
giving
you're
you a
not
reason to do
similar
what you
to
do.
each other, there's always going to have friction.
Yep.
Okay, just like in a marriage, there's always going to be friction. And once again, that friction can create some real dynamics that lead to a divorce.
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
you know.
So that go ahead.
So yeah, I think really what we're boiling down to is this whole idea of complementary strengths. Okay, that in essence we want this complementary synergy between the two partners.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean they're identical,
you don't want
but
identical people.
no, you don't.
No.
But it means that you complement, you fold together, you get each other. Okay. And frankly, what that boils down to me is you respect each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the highest form of partnership that I've seen, when two partners, in a marriage, we'd call it love. In a business partnership, we'd call it respect. Okay. But when you just know that this person has your back, and you know that they are very capable of everything that, you know, that's coming their way, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, you kind of become unstoppable when that happens. It's really cool. Okay.
Well, and it leads to this thing that we've talked about in the past shows, which was synergy.
Hmm.
And if you had someone that was an exact carbon copy of yourself, you were completely stunting your growth and your ability
Exactly.
to evolve and change and look at things
Hmm.
differently,
Right.
and to create that 1+1 is 3 kind of culture and
Hmm.
relationship. And so when we're saying complementary strengths, those are both hard skills and soft skills. They're in with your hand skills in the dental chair, and they're working with the team and how we view life and how we make decisions and things like that. You want to be able to, if you're aligned in how you view money and your values, and you have communication and clarity and trust, and then you have these complementary strengths, man, it's like attaching rocket boosters onto a practice, because it really
Hmm.
starts to take off into that next level.
Right. It does. Which then folds over into unified vision.
Yep.
Okay. Are you both in alignment with where you're going and why? Okay. Which, ironically, without a third party to ask partners those questions, it doesn't happen that often.
It's hard. Yeah,
Yeah, it
and
is.
unless you've had practice doing it yourself, and that's the thing that I have found coming from outside of dentistry into it is dentists don't view themselves as business owners very often, and so they
Hmm.
don't view themselves as owning a business
And,
like.
and 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 if they do, they're thinking they're building a kingdom,
Yeah, there's
typically,
like these
right?
two
Yeah,
extremes, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But oftentimes they think I'm a dentist that happens to own a business, and
Hmm.
my main goal, and which is amazing because I think that speaks to the type of people that are in the field,
Hmm.
but they're doing themselves a slight disservice because they're not looking at it like a business. Where are we going? Why are we
Right.
going there? And
Hmm.
actually defining that, it allows everyone in the practice to start rowing in the same boat in the same direction.
Hmm.
When oftentimes we come into partnerships, these the partners are in two separate boats rowing in opposite directions. Maybe one's approaching sunset and one's trying to ramp up, and they don't know where they're going and why, and they've never even talked about it or
Right.
considered what it
All
looks like.
Yeah, all they know is that they may not be happy where they are, but
Yeah,
I'm thinking of a partnership that we talked to earlier this year, and they've never really done the work to be a business.
yeah,
Okay. And now that they find themselves maybe in a disadvantage with some of their contracts and other things, they're kind of look at each other like, what do we do? Um, so you're right. They think of themselves as a dentist that happens to own a business.
hmm
And I think the correct paradigm is I'm a business owner that just happens to be a dentist.
I think so.
Okay.
It flips your mind into being a leader. You start to consider the different vision and values and the things that a business owner has to make decisions on, and
Hmm.
understanding and things like that. And one thing, Bob, that I would point out though is I would say the difference between a really like thriving practice is it has a owner that has said, I'm taking this into my control and I am the business owner now. And they're not just the
Hmm.
dentist. They're doing things, they're trying to do things intentionally. And then they often say, okay, I've realized how little I actually know. Can someone come help me and try to define some of these things as far as what it looks like to run a business, values and vision and all
Hmm.
that, and all that. So
Hmm.
a united
Yep.
vision, I don't think we can, it facilitates a conversation that you will never otherwise have unless it's
Right.
like the very beginning of forming a partnership and there needs to be a buyout or an exit or something like that.
Well, in the key operative phrase in that is united.
Yes,
Okay. Um, and the process itself is so valuable to create that vision together, and it can be as simple, honestly, as asking yourself the question, where do we want to be in 5 years? What
yep,
does that look like? And who's going to be with us?
exactly. And that's not a
And then you work
question.
backwards.
And one thing I think we also mess up on is we ask it one time
Hmm.
and it's never addressed again. I would definitely
Right.
say the best practice is to review it at least, every year if you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spend time actually and have it on paper, like we've said with everything else. Have it
Hmm.
on paper
Hmm.
so that there is no misinterpretation when we're communicating about it.
Right.
So
Right.
the last
And
the
and and
last
and
oh, go ahead.
let me just throw this in. A practice owner may hear this and think, well, man, who am I to say where I'm going to be a year from now? Okay. And how can I even guess what 5 years from now is going to be like? And it makes me think of this phrase that Dwight Eisenhower said, who was the Supreme Allied Commander during World War II in Europe, that planning is everything, but the plan is nothing. And that's like, huh? But what he means is the process itself of creating the plan has so much rich value in it. because if you don't know where you're going, it's like the Cheshire Cat and Alice in Wonderland. Any road will do. It doesn't matter. Okay. But if you know where you're going, you can, let me put it this way. The stronger the why, you can put up with any what. Okay. If you know where you're going and more importantly, you know why you want to get there. Yeah, you may aim for the moon or the sun and hit the moon. But if you don't aim for anything, you're just going to spin.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's part of this burnout phenomenon in dentistry is without a real vision of where we're going and why we're going there, it just becomes tedium.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kind of speak personally on it, of all the strategy meetings and vision conversations that we've had and we've helped facilitate with our clients, some of the best problem solving and solution creation happens during this vision, because you're like, oh, we want to get there. We actually have to address some of these issues that have been boiling and we haven't talked about. And so it creates so much more innovation. And when you're intentional about that, it just, everything trickles down. So
Exactly. Yeah. It cascades because it then starts to, because once you know where you're going, then you just ask, okay, how do we get there?
Yep.
And then you start to see those things that you've been ignoring.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the last key, the seventh key to a thriving partnership is unselfishness. And we like to boil it down saying, thinking we, not me.
Right.
And if you have listened to the previous 6, there's no way you can be successful in any of those if you don't have this underlying theme of saying, this is a we instead of me. Because if you are thinking me, there is no trust. Every communication conflict, expectation is all about me, myself,
what I want.
How do I get ahead? And there is no chance
how do I
for
make
successful
money?
Partnership if you have a selfishness and me attitude. But you can choose to have a we attitude, and it happens, I think, by following the previous 6 steps and really trying to come at it with that we, not me mentality.
And I think another point is, Covey taught this idea years ago of scarcity mentality or abundance mentality. And it was just profound for me because we think we live in a zero-sum world where if somebody gets something, then they've taken it away from me. And what his point was, listen, can't we grow the pie? Can't we make the pie bigger for both so that the fact that you have more, I get more too? And that mentality I have found over and over again impacts this sense of unselfishness or selfishness. That if we really believe in where we're going and how we're getting there and we respect each other, we can approach, even when things get hard, even when, something happens that was totally unexpected, we can come at our partnership from a standpoint of abundance and realize, you know what, we hang together or we hang separately. Okay, so let's grow this pie together.
Yeah. And I guess the bottom line is, for me, having a thriving partnership that follows these 7 keys to success, life is so much better. You avoid dental divorce. It's not to say that stress is eliminated, but it is sure shared with someone that you appreciate and care about.
And it's dramatically lessened.
And yeah, I think your view on it and the problems that you're solving become different problems. And
right.
To me, based on all the kind of the market research that we've had done, more and more solo doctors are going to have to consider going into partnerships and group practices. It's the way that you're going to have to stay competitive, and it gives you an advantage. Lots of times people that have been in the industry for a very long time will say, I want nothing to do with that, because they've only heard the horror stories.
Right.
Well,
Right.
we've seen what it looks like when you have someone that you can trust, that you can, that you're in alignment with, your money, your values, your communication, your vision, and you're unselfish with, and you have complementary strengths. When you have the
Yeah.
7 keys, life only becomes better.
hmm Yeah. And, somebody may listen to this and think, I really wish I would have done this work up front. And now I don't know where I am and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things that we love to do at Dennis Partner Pros is actually help partnerships regain their mojo by working through these issues and helping them see, you really do have it. Now let's do something with it.
Yep.
And that's really a fun place to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I think that was a great conversation. So if you did listen to this and you would like some help, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to be able to help your partnership accomplish these 7 keys to partnership success.